Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Catalano. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer at WorkTango. And for many of the community that's here on all of our webinars, thanks for coming back. And for anyone new, welcome. This is a webinar series we put on for the HR and leadership and business community at large to really help educate and inspire us on things happening in the workplace. And I'm excited to have you all here. And apparently some people have some other words as well, right? They're inspired, they're excited, engaged, ready. I like that. Some are fatigued. Hopefully, we can get some excitement going for the fatigued folks and curious. So appreciate you all following along. My role today is really to kind of introduce and get things started today and be your voice. Speaker today is Tania Dessa. We are so excited to have you, especially for this topic. When I think about the world of WorkTango and what we do for our customers, it has been a busy 2020, 2021 when it comes to understanding sentiment of employees. And it's not just been around engagement and the remote workplace. There is this heightened, and I think a positive heightened world around building better diverse workplaces. And, given our history and seeing you speak in the past, I'm just so pleased to have you here to share today the topic. Just by introduction, actually, what's one word to describe how you're feeling, Tania, before I dive into an introduction?
Pumped.
All right, I love it. Great. So, Tania Dessa is the CEO of Dessa Global Leadership Inc. It's an international leadership training and inclusion consulting firm whose mission is to inspire professionals to find voice and visibility in corporate workplaces so they feel more engaged and get promoted. She has traveled to over 80 countries and has lived everywhere from China to Switzerland. Amazing. She values cross-cultural stories and understands how to showcase who you are and why it matters in any environment. She's leveraging her MBA and corporate experience at organizations like the World Health Organization, Medtronic, Johnson & Johnson, and working with Fortune 500 clients across 5 continents. And she knows firsthand the power of bringing your whole self to work every day. Her unique presentation style is high energy. I know it. That's why we invited you. Excited for this. It's collaborative. So we want everyone to participate today, as we know the WorkTango crew does typically in these environments. And she asks powerful questions, offers strategic frameworks, and brings in real life stories to engage, educate, and enlighten participants. So we are excited to have you here, Tania. I'll hand the proverbial virtual floor to you. So take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. And welcome to the whole WorkTango community. I am, again, as I said, pumped to be here. A warm welcome to everyone who is joining us. And I wanted to kind of start off and kick off today with a story, just to share, reach out to each and every one of you and to share a story. So I hope that's okay. So a few years ago, I was actually one of 3 people to make it onto a lifeboat from a sinking ship. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking probably she was at the front of the line, or she probably elbowed people to get onto that lifeboat. But I actually got voted onto that lifeboat. I had 60 seconds to convince a boat full of strangers about why my life was worthy of that last seat. And it made me stop and think about what was really different about me, about what was unique about the way that I showed up and me so that I could earn that last seat. It's a moment that is so burned into my memory. But luckily, there were no human lives lost as a result of this shipwreck. It was a simulation, a training exercise in a leadership course in California. But there I was. I walked into this room and I was surrounded by strangers, put on the spot, and I was forced to discover what was unique about me. In that moment, I had to own it fully. And then I had to sell who I was and link it to why it mattered. And as I think about this, I feel like there are so many times in our life and in daily life where we have to do this exact thing, where we have to own who we are, what makes us unique coming into work every day. We have to own it and then sell who we are and why it matters. So in our time together today, when we're talking about talent acquisition, about building diverse talent pipelines, about building inclusive workplaces where we can bring all of who we are to work every day, I wonder what that looks like if we look at ourselves first, if we turn that lens and really own our diversity, as a way to role model what that looks like for other people, and then observe the ripple effect that it has. So let's dive into that together. The goal today is that we make this interactive. So please feel free, as Rob has said, to leverage the chat box. And let's dive into how we can take radical responsibility for how we show up every day and how we can be better champions, allies, and cheerleaders for the people around us. So thank you so much for the awesome introduction, Rob. I kind of wanted to introduce myself to you all via the 3 values I live and work by. So the first one is adventure. I love adventure. I love throwing myself outside my comfort zone, trying new things. That's, exploring ancient ruins in Asia. I think this was in Taiwan, or flying a plane upside down in New Zealand. I love that sense of adventure. The second value I live and work by is something I call living by example. I'm somebody who wants to be known for doing what she says she's going to do. Right? And at the end of the day, I am so grateful to have lived, studied, and worked abroad. And every time, everywhere from Barcelona to Zurich, I have soaked up the richness of the diversity of stories, accents, life experiences of the people around me. And I'm convinced that when we can embrace that diversity and value it from the people around us, everything is better. My third value is a word I made up called teamunity, because I love belonging to a team and being part of a community. And these are some of the teams and communities I am so honored to have been a part of in my corporate journey and in my life. Each time really exploring, again, that diversity. And from working in some of these global organizations, I know what it feels like to have to create visibility for yourself when your stakeholders or the people who are making decisions in your career may not be based where you are today. And that feels really real in the pandemic world that we're living in right now, right? We have to create voice and visibility for ourselves. But what you should really know is that my team and I are on a mission to inspire women and underrepresented minorities to own their voice and visibility every day, so that at the end of the day, they're feeling more connected and engaged, and they are getting promoted. We want to see more diversity in C-suite. And we love systemizing soft skills for technical folks. And these are some of the organizations we are so honored to partner with and collaborate with right across the world. And the reason I share that with you today is because I want you to know we're bringing stories, best practices, and ideas from some epic companies and across industries and geographies here today to talk about and to share. So let's acknowledge that today in the world that we live in, there's a leaky talent pipeline. This is data from Women in the Workplace 2020 study from Lean In and McKinsey. And a few years ago, they looked at this same data, and sadly, the numbers have not improved that much, right? We know that when it comes to men and women, there's less women coming in the doors of companies. And then when we look at progression, right up to executive level C-suite, women are falling off, right? So are people of color, women of color, men of color. There's less of them the more senior that we go in organizations. So we know that when it comes to representation, the drivers are hiring and promotion. And women and people of color are disadvantaged in both of these respects. It's a problem. Right? And if you're coming from an organization where you've got epic top talent and you're excited to see how they grow, but at some point they feel like they're hitting against the wall, you may end up bleeding top talent. So let's spend some time today to talk about strategies and ways we can stop that from happening, to plug that gap. And when we talk about it, I mean, at the end of the day, inclusion matters, right? At the end, if people are feeling like they're walking into work and they're feeling that sense of belonging, that sense of feeling included, it's better for them, and it's also better for the business. So what's in it for you? Why should you care about inclusion and this sense of belonging? Why should you put time, energy, and budget towards creating those kinds of environments? Well, employees who feel like they belong to a team are 10 times more likely to be highly effective, 9 times more likely to innovate. They are 4 times more likely to stay with their current employer. Walking into work or now logging in to work on the computer matters. When we feel like we belong, when we feel included, we're going to show up differently. And that has a ripple effect on not only our teams, but on our customers and the business. So this stuff matters. And give me a yes if you think this matters. If that's one of the reasons that you're here today or curious to learn and discuss more of this topic. Yeah, okay, the chat's blowing up. Yes, yes, yes. Heck yes. 100% yes. Awesome, for sure. Excellent. Okay, so you're not alone, right? There's many of us that feel this, that believe this. Awesome. So, I can remember the first time that I really found that sense of belonging and inclusion at work and noticing how that showed up in me and the ripple effect it had on the people around me. It was about 10 years ago. I just finished my MBA and I got my dream job. I was marketing leader at a big American healthcare company in Switzerland. And early on, I realized a few things. Number one, this was a sink or swim environment. I was thrown in and immediately expected to deliver. I'm sure that many of you can relate to that, right? The second thing I noticed is that when I looked around in team meetings, when I was shoulder to shoulder with my peers or logging into telephone conferences, very often I was the youngest. I was the only female in the room. I was the only visible minority. And I was the only North American. And I gotta say, being the only one in so many different ways, it felt lonely. It felt so lonely. And there were so many days where I felt like I was, opening the doors to walk into work and reminding myself to bring corporate Tania. I was covering up parts of me because I was trying to figure out my place in the team, in the region, and in the role, trying to figure out and be who I thought people wanted me to be. And then there were the micro comments, they usually came in morning meetings, and they were kind of sideways compliments, if you will. I didn't have the language to know what they were back then, but now I know them to be microaggressions, death by 1,000 paper cuts. And these little comments usually came in the morning and they sounded a little something like, "Oh boy, Tania, how many cups of coffee have you already had this morning? Oh boy, here's Miss Perky. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, too much energy so early in the morning. Tone it down, tone it down, tone it down, Tania." And hearing that so often, it really made me question it, and it soaked into my skin. And I started to think, okay, well, you know what? If I really want to fit in here, I probably do have to tone it down a bit. So I did. I started to tone it down. And I loved the work that I was doing. In fact, I was working on this really cool, cross EMEA project. And I remember being about 1 month away from launch. And I was sitting with my VP, running him through the whole strategy. I finish, I sit down, and I wait for his hopefully glowing feedback. I will never forget. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Tania, you are your own best kept secret. All this time, you could have been getting people excited to come along the journey with you. Instead, you've been keeping your head down, working hard, and you haven't told a soul. And one of the reasons I hired you was for your energy and enthusiasm, and I haven't been seeing it lately. You missed the boat." It was hard to hear that feedback, probably because it felt so true. I realized that I had toned it down so much that I had become this diluted version of myself. And I remember that, I think I realized for the first time that who you're being is as important as what you're doing, and that the way that you show up matters. So I'm sitting there and I made this silent promise to myself. I thought I was going to stop trying to be everything to everyone. It was exhausting and it wasn't working. I felt half of who I was every day. And instead, I was going to click the unmute button. I was going to bring the energy, the enthusiasm, the big eyes, the big teeth that is uniquely me into everything, into team meetings where we're brainstorming and trying to take ideas right through the product pipeline, into client meetings when we were trying to land new business or gain loyalty, into presentations when we were trying to pitch ideas to get the money to take ideas right through to launch. And you know what? When I clicked the unmute button and kind of gave myself permission to bring all of me to work every day, my outcomes in all of those areas changed. But what's pretty cool is that I noticed the impact it had on others. It was like by giving myself permission to be myself more at work, I had accidentally given others the same permission. And eventually the mix and the makeup of our team really changed. And so I realized that who you are is how you lead, and that matters. And there's this invitation that when we can bring all of who we are, when we can own our diversity, our lessons learned from our life experience, we can become this role model for the people around us. But let's face it, it takes massive courage to bring all of who you are into work every single day, right? And I feel like there are often these unwritten rules. Yeah, and I'm just checking on the chat here. You know, I always feel like I'm holding back part of myself. Brienne, hear you. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. And you know, I feel like you're not alone, Brienne. Just want to say that you're not alone. There are so many of us who I feel we hold ourselves back, or we hold on to these unwritten rules that we still believe, and they may be holding us back in the exact moment where we need to take that step forward, right? And sometimes it's cultural beliefs. Maybe you come from growing up in an environment where humility is honored, and speaking about yourself, showcasing your talents, talking about your strengths, that's for someone else. Leave that to the extroverts, the salespeople. That's not for me, right? Maybe it's a gender belief that you're holding on to, being the only woman in the factory floor or on that team call, wondering how to be seen or heard, or at least interrupted less. Maybe it's life experience that is holding you back. You were brave and you took a risk and it didn't work out. You courageously asked for something you want and you wanted and you didn't get it. And the memory of that, it still lingers. It's like this open wound that hasn't healed yet. So every time you want to show up bigger, you want to be brave, you want to take a step forward before you feel totally ready, you hold yourself back. You conform. We conform. In fact, I think that we spend so much time trying to be just like everyone else that we lose a little piece of who we really are somewhere along the way. So if this feels true to you, I want to offer you a new way to look at owning your diversity, owning your story, especially as a way to build diverse talent pipelines and to help grow others. And when we think about it from the lens of personal branding, if you're kind of rolling your eyes or shuddering even as I say those words, here's another way to look at it. Owning your worth is less about you than you think. If you have a strength, a talent, lessons learned from life experience that can positively impact the people around you, and you're keeping it hidden, you're actually stealing value from people who need it most. It's less about you and more about how you can be the solution to somebody else's problem. How lessons learned from your own career journey can help a junior employee at that exact moment where they feel they're at a crossroads in their career. But if you hold those stories in, if you don't share lessons learned from your own life experience, how can it benefit or impact the people around you? So I really want to invite you to reframe, to look at owning your worth in a new way for the sake of the people around you. And, you know, before the pandemic, I really believed that there was this myth that was infecting workplaces all around the world, every company, every geography, every industry. And it is this myth that has turned into a belief that my work will speak for itself, right? Look at it this way. If you're the one putting in long hours of hard work, keeping your head down and hoping that someone will notice, the truth is you risk being irrelevant or invisible. in your cubicle, especially now when we are working from home, out of sight, out of mind. It is up to us to take radical responsibility for our own career, to articulate who we are and link it to why it matters, to be the role model for others, to allow that permission to bring all of who we are into work every day so that people feel included, so that people feel like they belong and they feel safe and courageous enough to take the next step in their career path at your organization, right? So regardless of what it says on your business card or in your email signature, I kind of want to invite you to take on a new role today, okay? Now, some of you may have a visceral, a feeling come up when I say this, but that's okay. Just embrace it. Let's go with the discomfort, okay? I want to invite you to take on the role of a salesperson. Because like it or not, the world that we live in today is one where we are always selling who we are and linking it to why it matters. So whether you're pitching ideas to colleagues in a team meeting, trying to get top talent in an interview to join your organization and your team, or even showcasing your best character traits to a potential soulmate on match.ca or match.com, you are selling. We are all in sales, right? And especially when we're looking at talent acquisition and helping people grow and advance in their careers, we have to sell who we are and why it matters. And very often the vision of how they can add value and what is exciting in this next role. So we're always selling, especially in HR, which I know many of you are coming from today in the community. And there was an interesting study done a few years ago by Daniel Pink and Qualtrics. They felt so strongly about this, that we are all in sales, that they interviewed, I think, over 4,000 professionals in the US and the UK. They wanted to find out how much time we're spending doing non-sales selling. This is the time that we spend influencing and persuading people to take action on our ideas, right? Something we're always doing in performance reviews and in interviews, and very often every day at work. They found that we are spending 40% of our time doing non-sales selling. That means that today you are already spending 24 minutes out of every hour influencing and persuading people to take action on your ideas. Imagine if you were to spend a fraction of that selling yourself, where you want to go next in your career, or selling why your organization is the exact right place to be for top talent coming through the door, right? So I want to invite us to dive into some strategies, to brainstorm out loud. I want to share some stories and some data and ways you can take radical responsibility for the way that you're showing up today. Because when we look at building diverse talent pipelines, it has to start with us. And us taking radical responsibility for the way that we're showing up, and then noticing what's happening around us and how we can be better champions and allies to people in our lives. Okay, so let's dive into the...
Tania, I'm gonna interrupt you just because I have permission to, but it was a question that came up I thought was really fitting in the last couple of slides, and it was from Mark, and you might talk about it in future slides, but it's quite interesting. It says fitting into social, cultural, and organizational norms can be important to acceptance, a comfortable and secure fit within a team, and often being yourself is seen as being a disruptor or craving for attention. How do you find a balance between being yourself and what the organization expects as behavioral norms? Because I think we've all been in that situation where it's like, well, where am I crossing the line or stepping my boundaries? And just want to see if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. So that came from Mark?
Correct.
Mark, great question. And I think this is something that we all have to find our personal definition of. And the best way I've found to do that is to experiment and explore. So I really believe that authenticity is this range and we can play. And that's the way that we grow. And number one is understanding the microculture of your team and organization. And sometimes that comes with time or being hyper vigilant and observing. How are people showing up? What does the etiquette look like when we're joining a new team, logging into telephone conferences, popping into Zoom meetings, especially now as our workplaces have been turned upside down. So there's going to be a little bit of observation, noticing, and then I would say deciding how to show up. And the invitation here is to be brave and to play in a wider range, meaning that, if you go into one meeting and you're taking on more of an observer role, you're a little bit quieter, you're noticing what's coming up, challenge yourself in that next meeting to articulate 3 ideas, not to hang up on that call until you express your ideas and have your voice be seen or heard, right? So I think the invitation here is to play with that. And the one thing I want to say, I hear you when it comes to cultural norms. I think that we are all brought up a certain way, and there are beliefs that we hold based on where we've come from. In the work that we do, and I'm Indian, Canadian, I have lived, studied, and worked abroad. I feel like I'm this hybrid, and I have felt othered in many different ways, sometimes when I've been abroad. And so the best way I've learned to tap into, to honor where I've come from and the cultural part of me that I believe to be true to my identity, as well as embrace and grow in new environments that are just foreign and new to me, is to play in that range and to remember that it kind of goes to that why, right? If I can be in service of others, if I have a brilliant idea that can help drive the business or help a colleague, it's my obligation to say it out loud, even if I have been taught only to speak when spoken to, or if it feels less than humble. So I think if we can tap into the greater why and come from this place of being in service, the intention is pure, the intention is good, and it may give you the courage you need to speak out in moments where you haven't always felt comfortable.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe change those behavioral norms, right, with some of your actions in that broader scope. Okay, appreciate it. I'll just cover other questions, but excited to see what comes up in the next slides here.
Sure. And feel free to interrupt me anytime. Awesome. Cool. All right. So strategy number 1 is own your value. And there was some interesting study that came out of HP a few years ago. So the HR professionals at Hewlett Packard said, okay, we want to look at HR data and see when it comes to progression and advancement in careers, who is applying for roles and what is the promotion levels and rates looking like. They discovered that women only applied for promotions when they felt they met 100% of the qualifications, whereas men applied when they felt they met roughly 60%. Now, do men doubt themselves? Yes, of course they do. But what the data is showing us is that they don't let it hold themselves back as often as women do. And here's my take. I mean, if you're applying for a job where you only meet 100% of the criteria, you're going to be bored in 3 months. Where's the growth and the stretch there, right? And I think that what this really points to is that this is not a competence gap. It is a confidence gap. And low confidence leads to inaction. So there's this opportunity for us to leap before we feel totally ready. And I really want to put that out there for women and underrepresented minorities. Because often when you don't see yourself in executive leadership roles, or you don't see yourself in the media, we tend to believe that it's not our place, or we can't get there, or we're less certain and more risk adverse to try. And the opportunity here is to leap before you feel totally ready. And to remember that you don't have to do it alone, because sometimes it feels like we're trying to do everything on our own. And I want to take that idea and just keep it outside for a minute, okay? Because at the end of the day, you don't have to do it alone. It's about connecting, building, and championing each other, and really building a strategic network. So I'm going to throw out the words here: mentors, sponsors, advocates, allies, so many words really, right? I love networking. It's one of my favorite things. And the reason is because I see it as just connection. It's connecting with other human beings. And at the end of the day, when we're looking at career advancement, retention, progression, acquisition, retention, and progression, your networks matter. So you don't have to do it alone. Find people who you can get in your corner, whether that's a mentor who can give you advice, or a sponsor who's someone who's got skin in the game, who has reputation and social equity that they're willing to use on your behalf, and they understand where you want to go. Build those relationships, because the investment that you make today will absolutely pay off. It may pay off 3 weeks from now or 3 years from now, but it is equity that you are building. And I think in those moments where, we feel not ready yet, it is the sponsor and the mentor who kind of nudge you in the ribs and say, do it anyway. And we need those people. So let me pause to check in here in the chat box. Does this sound like you? Have you felt this before? Do you know people who are holding themselves back because they don't feel totally ready? And any best practices or sharing that you want to kind of vocalize in the chat box here? I think we have a lot of wisdom in the group here today. So let's swap learnings and best practices, right? Okay, I'm still hearing +1. Yeah. Yeah. I'm interviewing for a job tomorrow, which I am about 60% on paper, but I know I can do the job. Yeah. So I'm working on articulating my skills. Fantastic. B. Sarah Phelps. Awesome. Good luck with that. And I hope that you shine and are brave in the way that you are articulating who you are and why they need you. That's incredible. You've got the whole community cheering you on here. Perfect. Oh, Autumn. I personally entered my role before I thought I knew I was ready. Turns out I was. Awesome. We need to share more stories like that. That is so inspiring when we can say those stories out loud, because it gives others the encouragement and the courage to do it themselves. This stuff matters, right? And there's this power of community that we can tap into. Awesome. Okay. Oh, there's lovely community and connection happening here in the chat. Fantastic. You are living this in real time. So thank you for that. Strategy number 2, maximize your time. Time is this precious asset, right? And how we use it matters, especially at work. So I want to invite you to think about office housework and what task equality looks like. This is data that's come out from the World Economic Forum and Watermark. And what they discovered is that very often women or more junior employees will volunteer to do office housework. Office housework is taking meeting minutes, finding that spot in everyone's calendars to book that Zoom call. In the times when we were in the office, planning the parties, keeping the kitchen clean, ordering paper for the printer. It's non-revenue generating tasks that aren't adding to your career equity. So let's take a moment here and check in. Who is doing the office housework? Because that takes time, and it's often time that's taken away from your jobs and your priorities and those career building activities. So let's go back to the chat and just tap in here. Yeah, I'm the go-to guy. Dan, I hear you. I'm the go-to IT guy, right? We get branded once we take on these roles to always be called on for that. And I think there are times, I don't want to discount this completely. I think there are times where we can become those culture champions and find unique ways to make it part of our brand. But if that's the case, make sure you're talking about it at performance reviews. Make sure that you're creating the case studies to show how it's adding value either to the culture, to the team, or to the business, because that matters, right? And yes, there's power in saying no. Right, we're hearing here from the chat, I'm always the event organizer. I can fix the printer, but so can you. So there's this opportunity for us to stop, to question this in our teams, and to also not be the first to volunteer, because sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction. I know I used to sit in meetings and I couldn't handle the 5-second awkward silence. I would immediately shoot up my hand and I'd volunteer. Whereas if I had just waited an extra 20 seconds, stayed longer in that awkward silence, chances are someone else would have volunteered, right? When I had roommates, and I lived with roommates in university days, we had chore wheels. So we brought that equality and equity into our homes by having chore wheels. Why don't we bring that into the office, right? There are so many ways we can bring task equality and better management of time into our teams. The question is, are we doing it? And there's an opportunity for you to spark that conversation. Yeah. And looking at the chat here, we also am hearing that we rotate, we agree on who takes notes in our meetings. Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. Bringing in others, sharing experience and opportunities, it helps so that you don't get burnt out. Absolutely. Because Cynthia, always doing these things, it leads to burnout. It leads to taking precious time and resources away. Yes. Awesome. Okay. Now there's another volunteer activity that we're not seeing everyone's comments. Okay, I'll vocalize as much as I can. I think you can also put it to panelists and attendees to ensure that everyone can see the comments in Zoom. Awesome. There's another opportunity in our organizations when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, where volunteer work can actually be a career accelerator. It's when we can volunteer as part of employee resource groups. So some of you may have employee resource groups at your teams, in your companies. Some of you may be early on in the journey. Some of you may have had them around for years. Employee resource groups, or ERGs, sometimes called associate resource groups or business resource groups, they're voluntary. They're employee-led, and they're usually formed around employees who are coming together because of a common interest, right? Women at Intel, disability or differently abled folks at IBM, the Black Employee Resource Group at OLG, right? So there's many different types of ways that you can come together and create employee resource groups. And at the end of the day, these groups come together and they provide insights. They create psychologically safe spaces to talk about what's keeping you up at night and drive solutions to change policies, procedures, behaviors inside and outside the organization. They are also incredible innovative hubs, right? You can come up and create fantastic new ideas that represent our customers in different markets. So what I really want to put in here is that some volunteer work can be career accelerators. And if you're coming from an HR role, how are you using employee resource groups as top talent pipelines? Because employees who volunteer to co-chair, to lead, to be part of employee resource groups, they could be learning skills that they don't every day in their day-to-day jobs. And they're networking across functions, across levels. There's this opportunity for them to create visibility to senior stakeholders and be that underrepresented talent to get to the next level and to help progress. So really the invitation here in HR, from an HR lens, is to leverage ERGs as top talent pipelines and accelerators. So let me check in here. Love this idea. Sarah's saying, I love this idea. I've been in HR for 16 years. I remember these, but over time have forgotten. Yes, I hear you. And the other thing I'd say is one of the biggest risks or gaps that I see today with a lot of the companies that we work with is that when you start, employee resource groups are sometimes considered hobby groups. You celebrate cultural days or events, you have potlucks. And while that is so valuable to come together to celebrate, honor, and educate when it comes to culture, it cannot be the only thing. It cannot be the mission of your employee resource group. For ERGs to be sustainable, for them to drive organizational change, and I mean real change that's going to be lasting and impactful, they have to link to business outcomes. They have to somehow be driving revenues, driving change within the business, connecting with new customer segments or markets. There has to be the link to business because that's the way you can continue to sustain time, energy, and budget of all stakeholders that are involved. And that includes executive leaders, right? So I really want to put that call to action and light the fire. If you notice that ERGs are hobby groups and maybe more considered that way in your organization, to pivot and start to think about really practical ways you can link to the business. And I love talking about this. You can always reach out to us to chat about that later. So let's check in on the chat here. Eileen ARG found a great way to build experience and change management. Yes, absolutely. We created a new mission and a process and encourage being nimble. And it's great on my resume. Yes, if you are part of an ERG, put that on your LinkedIn profile. Please make it part of your personal brand and your career equity immediately. It matters. And it's an awesome differentiator versus your peers. Yay, Kathy, thank you so much. Okay. Okay, strategy number 3, champion and be an ally. And now more than ever, we need to do this for each other. So again, it's tapping into that invitation to take radical responsibility for how you're showing up and to notice what people around you need too and how you can show up for them. So I love this comic. That's an excellent suggestion, Miss Triggs. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it. I don't know about you, but tell me if this has ever happened to you. You'd be in a meeting and I feel like I pitched an idea. It kind of didn't land. And then 30 seconds later, somebody says the exact same idea and everyone thinks it's the most brilliant thing they've heard. I'm like, I just said that. Hello. And I felt so invisible and not heard and seen and frustrated as heck, right? It happened to me this morning. It happens to me all the time. Oh my gosh, yes, this is so frustrating. Okay, so good to know I'm not alone, right? So I want to share one of the strategies, actually 2 women in Obama's strategy team felt in his early years, in his first year in office. There was only 2 women on his strategy team. And these women were constantly feeling like they were being talked over or their ideas were being robbed in terms of airtime. They came together and they made a pact. They said, okay, when one of us pitches an idea, the other one is automatically going to paraphrase that idea and give credit to the person who said it. Something so small, a small action that had massive impact. It amplified their voices in team meetings. And the result is that Obama started to call on them more. They had a new platform for voice and visibility. So I want you to think about who's not being heard in your meetings, whose voices are not coming to the table, and how can you be the amplifier for them? From a talent acquisition perspective, whose resumes are not being seen? Which talent pools are you not tapping into because you're going to the same universities or going to people you know, like, and trust? How can you broaden that scope and ensure that there's diversity and a broader net that you're casting out there? So there's this opportunity to notice what's happening today and decide how you want to show up and how you will be that amplifier for women or underrepresented minorities at a time when they need it. And this is going to require you to create psychological safety, that safety that we can create in any moment, in any conversation, whether that's one-on-one or in a team meeting or with customers and clients, right? How do you create a psychologically safe space so that you can challenge each other, you can debate, you can create that moment of silence so that the introvert or the newest person on the team feels safe and bold enough to articulate their idea. This matters. And each and every one of us has the opportunity, actually the obligation, to create that for the people around us. So that's the invitation I want to put out here today, now, and to this group. It really starts with us. There's an opportunity for you to also step up and be an ally and to disrupt bias in the moment that we see it happening. So when there's an inappropriate joke, somebody makes an inappropriate joke, are you that person that kind of rolls your eyes and does the awkward laugh and chooses to ignore it? Are you the person that stops and says, I don't get it. Can you explain to me why that's funny? Right? It's finding the most authentic way you can do that. And being brave in that moment to disrupt bias in the moment that we see it. And
oh, sorry, I thought you were done your thought.
Go ahead.
It's interesting because there was a question I was sitting on for a while that I think you kind of answered, and it was really around, organizations may verbally or paper highlight the values of inclusion and belonging. But within your experience, if you had to speak truth to power, help employees feel safe and courageous enough to do so, further, how to do so when you're often the one and only on a team or leadership team? And when I think about amplified other voices and some of the things you just mentioned, those are awesome, ideas and thoughts. And just seeing if there's any other color that you might want to add in terms of people might be in the situation where we're all in the same community thinking the same thing, but we're on an island when we're in our offices or on our calls. Any other thoughts in terms of, how to voice or other ideas? And maybe you've done a lot of them right now, but any other thoughts?
Sure. So I mean, building psychological safety in teams and how to live our values.
Yeah, or just, how to help employees feel safe and courageous, and same thing.
Yeah, I think that we have to practice what we preach. So it's us showing up and deciding, be intentional before we log into that Zoom call or before we dial in, right? And for me, I like to set that intention. So today, my intention is, okay, to be brave or to be playful or to be an epic risk taker. When you can define and set that intention for yourself, your user experience is going to be different. Meaning the way that you show up and the way that you curate that, just holding that top of mind, the questions that you answer, the way that you sit, the way that you vocalize your ideas will be different. So I invite us to take radical responsibility and choose how we want to show up and to not minimize the impact that that can have on the people around us, right? There's this ripple effect that we may not even know is happening until the next meeting when somebody feels brave enough to state, hey, this happened last meeting and I was really upset about it, or to pitch a risky idea. And the second part is, in meetings, I think that we can also own our time and set healthy boundaries. So one thing I used to do in corporate, I found I made a rule not to accept calendar invites without agendas. And it sounds like something so crazy, but it gave me more control over my time and it made people rethink why they were setting up meetings in the first place. And I think that can be a powerful way to articulate boundaries and just get practice in building that muscle, because then in the courageous moments where we're stopping a rude joke or speaking up when we see bias in a hiring process, we're build up that muscle of speaking up, of creating boundaries, of articulating them out loud. So I think sometimes give yourself permission to start small and to grow, because you're increasing your comfort level with discomfort. And that's important, right? That's going to help us at work and in life. Yes.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions that are coming up here around this? And then I'll share one more thing with you, and then let's open it up for discussion. Interruptions. I mean, now we're in Zoom and it sometimes feels awkward. How do I interrupt somebody? Or, sorry, not sorry. And so there was interesting data that came out of the tech industry a few years ago. A PhD sat through 900 minutes of meetings, and she discovered that men were 3 times more likely to interrupt women, but women constantly interrupted each other 89% of the time and almost never interrupted men. So let's face it, in an agenda-packed, time-constrained meeting, it is tough enough to get your ideas out there and to be heard and seen, but to be interrupting each other, it's this unnecessary obstacle that we just don't need. So how can we be more mindful of interruptions occurring, who is interrupting, and who they are interrupting? I know I said that right. Who's the interrupter and who's the interruptee, basically, right? And when we notice that happening, what do we do in that moment? Because that's an allyship opportunity. That's an opportunity for us to speak up, to create space, to create that moment of silence, to create more airtime equality in meetings. And we need that now more than ever when we are working from home and out of sight, out of mind. And so many of us are struggling right now. So, it's about consistency and being deliberate. Yeah. Excellent. It sounds like Susan has some BK best known methods or best practices to share too. So the invitation here is to be responsible for how you show up. We are all responsible for the energy that we bring into every call, every team meeting, every interview, every performance review, every family dinner, right? Own how you're showing up. Be responsible for the energy that you bring, because it has this ripple effect on the people around us. And I love that Maya Angelou quote: people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. People will never forget how you make them feel. So every day we have the power to own how we show up, because we are curating the experience of the people around us. And if we can do that, to create that sense of inclusion and belonging, it's going to help employees who are already part of our teams. It's going to attract diverse people into organizations, and it's going to help them grow and advance and stay with us. And all of that matters, right? And I think especially for this community, it's why you're here to discuss this. So let me ask Rob, what are some of the questions that are coming up? Let's chat a little bit about sharing BKMs or best practices. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so one question that came up, I think, is a place we've all been in terms of roadblocks on trying to get progress in this space. But the question basically says, I've recently left corporate to focus on promoting inclusion, and my question is about when and how we can switch the narrative. So we push and push for people to share and be open, but if the corporate environment isn't safe, why is it up to the employee to do the work and take the risk? Shouldn't the company make it a safe space? And I think we've all been there and want that, that level of ownership of the organizational world, but it's not always available. So any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, we can't afford to wait. Bottom line, right? If we're sitting back and waiting for our leaders to make the first move or to make all of the action, to curate all the action, we could be waiting forever. So I think it's recognizing that we all have a role to play. And I truly believe in top down and bottom up. So some examples and ways we can take action is to recognize that we do need leadership buy-in. For the organizations and the teams that we work with, the places where it's working best, the places where we see change happening, leaders buy in, meaning that they vocalize their support, they set goals and objectives, they put budget to it, because we can't continue to drive change when we're doing off the side of our desk or there's no budget allocated. It does not work, right? They buy in and they give their social capital and their equity voice. So executive sponsorship is key. And that may be one executive leader to start with. And then they get the buy-in of their peer group, or they put their leadership stake in the sand and say, here's what we're going to drive, at least in our business unit. And that becomes the role model for others. So I think you need to start there. And then from an employee perspective, wherever you are in your career journey, in the hierarchy or in functions or geographies, it's recognizing that you have a role to play. So it's deciding, what do you want to do? Maybe it's sparking that conversation with your manager. Maybe it's sparking that conversation with HR. Maybe it's starting an employee resource group or sharing your learnings from today's webinar with somebody, with a key stakeholder in your organization. But it's deciding how you want to show up and then taking action. And that is a powerful way to start and create a peer community and get the right stakeholders in the room to then have that grow and then drive that change together. But I truly believe we all have a role to play, and it's deciding.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the title of this session says it all, right? Like, it starts with you. And I think, the company may not be ready for it, but it's kind of our personal goals and to get it on the agenda, so to speak. Great. So I know there's a couple of other questions. Hopefully we can get through them all. And one is from B. Sarah. Is it possible to encourage a recruiter to be brave and really consider hiring you, even though you are unconventional? So, I'll kind of leave that to answer. I'm not sure if it, in terms, touches some of the items you mentioned, but interested in your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, Sarah, I think it's about owning your awesomeness, right? And you can say that you're unconventional, or you can show it, right? In the way that you're presenting your resume, in the way that you're pitching yourself. There is power in demonstrating our greatest value versus just speaking it out loud. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm pretty high energy, and you could probably tell from like the big eyes and big teeth coming out at you, right? I don't have to say I'm enthusiastic. Hopefully you feel that. So if unconventional is your superpower, how are you going to demonstrate that in the interview? And it's your job to link it to why it matters. So how could being unconventional be value added for this team, the business, and this stakeholder in this company, right? I think it's up to you to make that link about why they need it, if it's your secret sauce.
Awesome. You talked about ERGs earlier and some of the, getting executive buy-in, and I'm interested to know if that, any other thoughts on getting buy-in? Are there specific resources you might recommend, or stats that you can think of top of mind, or even other benefits that we may not think of when it comes to selling in the concept of ERGs to our teams, executives, etc.?
Sure. I think there was a lot of data around ERGs being very powerful change makers and culture champions. What's really important is buy-in from someone. I think you start small, and one of the pitfalls I see companies falling into is trying to be everything to everyone. It's saying, we're going to drive diversity in all scales, right? It feels overwhelming. It's too broad, and there's no real way to measure success. So I think it's okay to define where you want to start, right? And very often in the work that we do, we help define what that 5-year plan looks like. What is the change? What's different in the way that you're showing up or your organization looks like 5 years from now? And then bringing back and saying, what are you going to start with in year 1? And you must define metrics for success, because what we don't measure often doesn't happen, right? So what does success look like in terms of numbers, in terms of metrics, qualitatively and quantitatively, whether that's through engagement surveys, which, WorkTango is epic at, or how are we measuring that over time? So I think make sure that you're starting, you understand the broader vision, and you understand where you want to start within year 1, and then have ways to measure success every step of the way. It makes it manageable, bite-sized, and possible. And the stories that you'll be able to share every month and every year will help garner more support and allyship and championing, and that matters too.
And just thank you for spending your time with us today. Really, really appreciate it. So wishing you all a wonderful rest of the Thursday.
Thank you so much.